Alright guys, so today we're making a review for the Suicide Squad game, and I don't feel this video needs to be too absurdly long, because most of what I'm gonna say is gonna be in that first impressions video. So for those of you that just want to hear my first thoughts on the game, and like, if I think it's good, if I think it's bad, just a quick little thing, that's all over there, go watch that. If you watch that video and think I'm absolutely insane, and want to understand, where I'm coming from, and my points and all of that stuff, more detail. That's what this is for, because I feel like I played more than I usually do for a first impressions video when I made that game. I played about 80 to 90% of the game at that point, and so I don't have too much to add, but I'm going to go in a bit more detail here. And so the easiest thing to do here is to break it down from gameplay and story, right? And so let's start with the thing that I think is going to be the simplest to go over, where people are going to disagree probably the most, and just something that I feel like we can get out of the way quickly. So a lot of people hate the story, right? The 2 or 3 days before this game launched, you saw everyone flipping out, and this video is going to have spoilers. I just want to put this out there. It's a full review. There's no spoiler-free video. The first impressions is out there. That's spoiler-free if you want that and haven't finished the game. But spoilers. So again, before the game came out, everyone was talking about the cutscene where you see Batman die, right? One, I don't think that's that bad. I played the Arkham games. I played them all. I've played Arkham Knight 4 times probably, all the way through. I liked the games. I played them, right? So like that point is there. It's not like, oh, I don't know this Batman. I never played these games. The problem that they kill that's not a problem for me. I have absolutely no issue with it, right? It's not like they just absolutely disgraced the man. I mean, he was defeated in combat. He wasn't at his full self. I don't think that it was the stupidest, most disgraceful way to kill a character ever. I don't get what all the hate is about. But let's rewind it a little bit. So the story, what's your general summary? Well, it's a very formulaic way of going about it, right? Brainiac takes over, and you have to kill the Justice League, right? Because they're under his control, right? That's pretty much the only premise you get at the beginning of the game. Now, there's some of them that are controlled, some of them that aren't, but the point is, essentially, this is how the story works out. You have to kill a member, and in order to kill the member, you have to get a specific item. So you do a mission to get said item, you learn how to use said item, and then you do the boss fight with said item. And that's pretty much how it goes through all of the members. You just go through one by one, fighting them individually and getting the, MacGuffin that you need in order to complete the boss fight. Now, in terms of quality and boss fight design for each of them, they scale, right? Batman, understandably, to people's complaint, has the worst boss fight. It's not great, right? It's not very fun. It's kind of boring and generic, and I understand, like, it's difficult. Of all of these people, Batman is probably the hardest one to do a boss fight for, and that makes it in somewhat fun in this type of style of gameplay where it's just bullet sponginess, but it still could have been done a lot better. We're getting off track. The story, they turn evil, you kill each of them one by one, you do the whole, typical plot theme where, oh, you have to learn to work together as a team to be able to take them out, blah, blah, blah. It's hinted at. It's really not that heavy of a theme here as I thought it was going to be. They say it a couple of times, but they don't reinforce it as much as I thought they would. So there's that. Lex Luthor is involved. You go to another Earth and learn that there's multiple Earths, and Brainiac is doing this on multiple Earths, and that's how he's perfected this master plan. He's doing it on every Earth at the same time across all the Earths in the multiverse to completely take over, and it's a multiversal constant, I think is what he says, right? Him taking over and destroying the Earth. Right? So you go to another Earth to get a Lex Luthor and teach you how to take down the Justice League and save your Earth. That's essentially the story summarized, right? There's some minor plot points here and there, but the overarching theme, that's how it tends to go. Really, if you don't have a problem with the way Batman dies, and you just expect to kill the Justice League, the name of the game, and you aren't like completely blown away and backstabbed by the fact that you're killing them, the story here is fine. It's exactly what I expected. It's actually a little bit better than what I expected. A lot of the story moments, like King Shark getting the lantern ring, are really cool. I actually thought those were really nice cutscenes. The Superman and Wonder Woman fight is actually really cool, but that's just stuff that, side details here and there. The story isn't absolutely amazing, but in no means is it bad. When comparing this to other games within the same type of genre, especially the superhero games, Avengers, and Gotham Knights, I think of the three, this has the best story. Now let's talk gameplay, because that's what most people care about, and especially in this game, it's actually really important when comparing it to other games like this. And so there's really three main aspects here. There's the main story and what you're going to be doing within the combat and the side missions of that. There's the looter shooter aspects of it, and then there's the end game. And so let's start with the very vanilla aspect of it, which is what you're going to be doing for about most of your 10 to 13 hours of the main story and side missions. So for the most part, this is your typical looter shooter, bullet sponge type enemy game, except even compared to the two other games we're comparing this to, the Avengers and Gotham Knights games, which are both melee-focused games, the enemies here, even in a game where you're using guns, which typically do more damage at a faster rate, still die faster than when compared to those games. And so what this does is really one positive and one negative, right? Depending on how you look at it. And so it causes the player to feel stronger, but it requires that there's more enemies on screen at once for you to kill, because they feel like such not a threat, right? Because you can kill them so quickly and so efficiently, they don't feel as powerful and as threatening as running into 3 or 4 brutes in the Avengers game, let's say, or the Gotham Knights game, right? And so the point here is that the combat feels, even at its base level, strip away the gear min-maxing and the ultimates and the suicide abilities and the skill tree, and strip all of that away. At its base, the combat here with the traversal feels so much better, because, like I said, with the Avengers game and Gotham Knights, if you strip all of the extra stuff away, it's just a melee game, right? It boils down to a melee game that's very slow and boring and not paced excitingly when just participating in the combat. Here, you can give somebody absolutely nothing but the core gameplay. Again, take all of that stuff away, and just the traversal and the combat, and they'll have a good time for probably the entire runtime of the game, because this game is short, right? Now, if this was a 30, 40-hour game, this point would mean absolutely nothing. But because that story is 10 to 13 hours, the gameplay here holds itself. And then on top of that, you have this whole system of the gear and min-maxing, and do I want an acid build, or a fire build, or a health build, or this or that, and then depending on which character you're playing, do you want to be a ranged build as Deadshot, or this build, a melee build as King Shark, and if you want to do more damage at range, you want to do more damage at close, all these different types of stats you can switch in and out. Now, that being said, I played the game on the hardest difficulty. Other than when I was doing something wrong within my build, I very, 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 very rarely died. So the game's not difficult enough to where all that min-maxing actually matters yet, but I'm sure it will be as they release the new seasons with increasing difficulty. But the game needed another difficulty mode. That would have raised this even more. If you're going to put that whole looter shooter aspect in it, you need to have that difficulty there to make it feel like when you're upgrading your weapons and doing all of this crafting, it's worth your time. Because what ends up happening is what happened with me when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, and I can't imagine this on easy or medium, you feel the need to stop caring about crafting weapons or equipping new afflictions or new mods for your weapons. There's no point, because you never feel any type of threat, right? The only time I, again, struggled was when I was using a mod that did 10% of my health every time I didn't land a critical shot, or tried to play without the jetpack just to see how difficult it was. Stuff like that. I was never challenged here, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas something like the Avengers game on some of those hardest difficulties, or Gotham Knights on that hardest difficulty, is actually challenging, and you have to pay attention to what you're doing. If we're going to talk looter shooter, I feel like we have to talk Destiny. Destiny does it well, right? Destiny, when it comes to difficulty, people play and grind and do the Crucible missions every single day for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks just to get that min-max stat on their build that brings their light up by like 0.4, right? And if that sounded like Japanese to you, I'm sorry, but that makes sense to people that play Destiny. People play for that tiniest stat boost, and that isn't here, and we'll get to the end game when we get there, but it's not there in the end game, and it's not there in the difficulty within the main story and side missions and all of that combat. So, while the gameplay is fun at its core, again, better than the melee combat of Gotham Knights and the Avengers game, it's not at that point yet where it has that ceiling to scale, right? There's nowhere to go. Because the skill tree is all percentage based, I've been over this before, and I believe both the Gotham Knights and Avengers videos, funny enough, that you need a skill-based skill tree. A percentage-based skill tree in a game like this is incredibly fucking boring and doesn't encourage people to interact with it. They just want to just complete it to complete it. They don't actually care what they're getting. I stopped reading the skill upgrades because it was plus 5% bonus when your combo is over 30, plus 10% health when your combo is over 25, plus 30% Suicide Squad buildup when you use melee weapons, stuff like that. And when the difficulty doesn't matter and the upgrades are boring, that brings the gameplay down, at least the ceiling available to get to. Now, when we talk difficulty, there's two ways to do difficulty, and the way that looter shooters have to do it always pisses people off. You either go for a skill-based difficulty, which is something like Elden Rings, Dark Souls, those types of games where you have to memorize attack patterns, this and that, and know how to use your build against what type of build they are in order to quickly and efficiently take them down, right? That's the skill-based build. A lot of games like this, the looter shooters, don't use that. They go for the artificial difficulty, which is where they just have a bunch of health and you just do a little bit of damage, right? And this game has that a little bit. But look at, like, again, the Avengers game. Look at the Division especially. Destiny does a good job of balancing both of them. Yes, there are bullet sponges in Destiny. Yes, there are skill-based bosses and encounters in Destiny. But that's the hardest thing I think this game's going to have when it gets to that end game, is that it has to balance that difficulty. And if it doesn't increase that difficulty, there's going to be no point to play this. Because yes, there are those infamy sets, which you can get Black Mask sets and Bane sets and different types of gear from different types of villains, which is cool, it sounds cool, it looks cool, but there's no gameplay reason to do it because the difficulty isn't there to support it. So let's talk endgame real quick, because I think boss fights is relatively subjective and it just depends on what you like. But let's talk endgame. So what is the endgame here? So there's two types of endgame that you can cause problems with, and there's too much to do to where it's overwhelming, and there's the problem that this game has where there's too little to do. So once you beat the game, do the final boss fight, spoilers, beat Brainiac, all there is left to do is do missions, which you've done the whole game, to get supplies or credits or currency, whatever you want to call it, to do more missions that you have to do more missions of in order to do a boss fight that you've already done in order to get a chance to get a weapon, a augment, a neck bomb upgrade, something along those lines, right? Which is cool. Don't get me wrong, right? The Bane sets, the Black Mask sets, like I just mentioned, if they continue this, right? Add villain sets, add cool sets of gear. That's the appeal of these looter shooters, is adding cool gear. But because you have to do the same thing you've done the whole game, the same type of mission in the same locations with the same boring enemy types, to get this gear, it's not worth it at the rate it's at. So, if they add interesting endgame stuff to do, it'll be fine. It's all here. The foundation is here. They just need to add on it, right? There's not a lot of endgame here. I'm gonna be honest. Once I beat the story, I played for like another 2 hours. I'm not playing 6 missions to do one mission to get a chance to get one of these pieces of gear, right? And that's essentially how this system works, and it's just not worth it yet. That's all going to depend on how much endgame you like, right? How much depth you want to go into. They allude that there's going to be 12 more Brainiacs to fight, which would you would see 12 seasons of the game, which if they compete with things like Fortnite, Call of Duty, all of those games that have seasons, you would be looking at 4 seasons a year, which would bring you out to 3 more years of support for this game. Now, I don't know after the way this game launched and the way it was received, they have 3 more years of support in them, but if they do it right, it can work. They tease the next 4 characters, or 3 characters, it's Joker, which they've already showed, it looks like Captain Cold, somebody else, and then Deathstroke. If with each one of these characters they release, just like the Avengers game, they release a new character with their own story that's 3 to 5 hours long, and then a new Brainiac fight that is not a recycled Justice League fight, because we'll get into that in a second, that will be interesting along with the new villain set, right? You'd have to go through and you can be earning this villain infamy set. Let's say they add a Two-Face set, and you can be earning this Two-Face set while you're playing the story for Deathstroke and doing the boss fights and earning all these different sets of armor and stuff with a new difficulty setting, because even on the mastery settings that they add in the endgame, it's still not difficult enough. That would be fun. But at launch, none of that shit's there. So let's talk about the boss fights now. And so the problem everybody has with the boss fight, and all of them, are pretty much exactly the same, right? Yes, some of them have different mechanics. Like, for example, the one everybody's seen, the Flash, right? The whole, he's moving too fast, IGN review, right? He runs around until he stops moving, and then you focus shot him, and then you have a chance to do damage, right? And if you know the type of game this is, you know the type of game that, again, Gotham Knights and the Avengers game are, this is what I expected. But if you weren't expecting that, let me just break down the problem for you, because it's a review, to get it out of the way. So, the Flash fight, you do focus shots until once he stops moving, and then you do a bit of damage, he runs around a bit more, you do a focus shot, repeat, right? The Green Lantern fight, you dodge his constructs until you do enough damage to them, until you can do a focus shot, which then you're able to damage him, his shield is down, and then his shield goes back up, and then you repeat that. The Superman fight, he zips around the map, constantly throwing stuff at you. You can damage him here and there a little bit until he gets weak enough and you build up enough of the gold kryptonite to do a focus shot. And you see where I'm going with this? Every fight is survive until you can do a focus shot and then do a little bit of damage. And you do that over and over and over and over again. The problem with this is the Brainiac fight. They built up the Brainiac, right? He took down the Justice League. And then the Brainiac fight is just the Flash fight. Just again. And I actually wouldn't hate this if it had, like I said earlier, all of that difficulty that they added to it, and there was a point to all this difficulty getting new gear and doing it over and over again and the grind, but none of that's here. At least it's not here yet. Because if they do what I think they're going to do, and they add the 12 more Brainiac fights, and every single one is just a different member of the Justice League's fight, just a Brainiac version of it with goons, that's going to be boring as hell. They either need to do one of 2 things. Release a major amount of endgame content at once within this first update, or do not rinse and repeat the fight. If that first season comes out with the Battle Pass, and with Joker, and with the second of the 13 Brainiacs, with the new Earth, the new Infamy sets, if that comes out, and somebody gets to the end of it, and it's just the Batman fight, or the Superman fight, just again, people are going to be pissed. You have to come up with new and interesting fights within your expansions, right? And when your endgame content is just the same fight you've already done, it doesn't look good. Now, I'm not saying you can't have refighting all of the fights, the Superman fights, the Flash fight. You can't have that. That's not a problem. I don't have a problem with that, but you have to have more. You can have the final boss fight. You can even keep the Brainiac fight as a Superman fight for the first season of the game. You can keep that. But then you have to have other boss fights in the game. You can't just reuse the same thing as your endgame content that you already did for fucking 13 seasons, right? And you see what the problem is, that why people are complaining about the endgame. There essentially is none right now, and what they did to make the end game just sucks, right? It's not promising for the future of the game. So now that I just ranted for about 15 minutes, let me talk to you guys about my overall thoughts on the game, right? I know it sounded like I was just negative for like 20 minutes straight, but if you watch my first impressions video, it's very positive, and that's because I feel like I've said the positive things I had to say. The story, I have absolutely no problems with. It's not amazing. I'm not crying playing it. I'm not gonna remember it, but I didn't have any problems with it. It was fine, right? The gameplay was better than I expected. I expected this to be worse than Gotham Knights overall, but especially gameplay-wise. But I had thorough enjoyment of the gameplay once I understood how it worked. Now, yes, not without ranting, the difficulty wasn't there, and the looter shooter aspects of it aren't great yet. They can be. The foundation is here. So, could this game have been easily an 8 if the story was decent and the gameplay was decent and the endgame was decent? Yes. But it lacks difficulty in gameplay. The story is fine, and the core gameplay is really what's strong here. The side missions absolutely suck. Side content is not worth engaging with. The customization isn't great. There's no point to any of it yet, again. But what's there, the foundation, is good. So, while a lot of people are giving this like 2s and 3s and saying this absolutely sucks, their expectations were either too high or they're jumping on the hate train. This game, foundationally, is not terrible, and at the core mechanics is better than a lot of the other games you have in this genre. That being said, it has fucking microtransactions. So, and they're fucking awful. It's $16 for a skin. So, if I already didn't have problems with the game, that's a whole point off in and of itself. Absolutely not. We're not doing that. And then it's going to have a battle pass, so I'm sure that'll get worse. So, for that reason, the game's going to be a 6 out of 10. I was originally sitting at a 7 out of 10 when I finished the game, right? But just the end game, the lack of it, and the microtransactions, I'm pulling it down to a 6. So Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is a 6 out of 10. Now, I want to make it as clear as possible. I know I've said this about 15 times at this point, but this game can be good, and I'm not reviewing it based off of, oh, will the game be good in fucking 6 months? No. Is the game good now? Now, for $70, if you know what you're expecting, if you know what you're getting into, this game, you're not going to be pissed off that you spent $70, right? But give this game 6 months, a year, if they take the end game in the right direction, they make it more difficult and give you cool gear sets that are worth playing through those difficult missions, this game could actually be the first good looter shooter superhero game. But that's just my thoughts. I already know you guys disagree. If you're still here, let me know. If you made it this far and listened to me rant for 25 minutes, congratulations, good for you. But let me know what you guys think of the game. If you hate it, if you love it, if you disagree with anything I said, and what characters you want to see, right? Because Deathstroke is really the one that I'm looking forward to. So if you have one that you really want to see that I haven't thought about yet, let me know down in the comments below so I can be excited with you when they don't come out. But hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you on the next one.